We looked at the results of the raid only a day after the release of the season, and now that we are essentially a day away from the release of the next week, it's time to take a look again at how things have been going in the raid. Also keeping in mind, of course, that this is the reset where the balance tuning announced a few days ago will also take place, so the things such as the 3% nerf to Affliction, the 8% buff to Arms, the 5% buff to Red Paladin, those will go live essentially in this second reset. What we started looking at last time was the heroic overall damage that was done in the raid. And even, early on, of course, we were checking normal as well. Now that we have way more heroic logs, we saw and warned against a few of these results because of the impact that having a 4-piece set bonus was going to have for different specs. So pointing out, yeah, it makes sense if, Affliction Warlock is gaining this much damage if their gain of new tier set compared to the gain of a few other specs is significantly lower, especially when you consider swapping from your old tier to your new tier. When you are Affliction and you are gaining 11% damage while DK is gaining 24%, or you have Feral Druid gaining 20%, Shadow Priest is gaining 23%, so obviously these results were not going to be that relevant until you got your 4-piece set bonus. But now with more, especially the last couple of bosses that not many players were going through yet, in the first couple of days we checked last time and we only had a handful of logs on Fractilius, for example. If you look at the logs now, we have several hundreds worth of logs, so way more players got through Fractilius, and then of course the last couple of bosses as well. So now more tier tokens have gone out, more players have gone through their catalyst charges to then complete their tier sets. You can get a bigger and clearer picture of the results. Now, this will get, of course, even clearer now that we have some results when it comes to Mythic. Basically, you have roughly about 200 or so logs available for the first boss, another 170-80 of the second boss, since it's just about as easy as the first one, and then the first block of the reset for the non-5 nights plus raiding guilds is going to be Lumitar, just like last season it was Rick Reverb. For the top 30 or so guilds, the block week 1 is going to be Araz, just like Styx was the block in week 1 last season. But for the other guilds, for most of the other guilds, it will be Lumitar. So already you can see the difference if we split this between heroic and mythic and then check the difference between the two. The first to check, of course, is Affliction. Since Affliction has been the top dog in these first 5 days of the season, you go from topping the meters in Heroic, and you go in Mythic, and Affliction is here. You look at the play rate as well. You have Demo, and then Destro, and then you have 44 Affliction players, compared to the 369 Demo players, with Demo being right here. So, as expected, as predicted, it's not that Affliction was going to continue to have this result once the, content actually mattered. Meanwhile, also as predicted, some of the specs we already saw there, like we mentioned, for example, Elemental, as well as Demo itself, were expected to do well, even just by the simulations, right? Just by looking at what we were expecting of these specs, like Demo and like Elemental Shaman. So, getting into Mythic, these are the specs that have continued doing well. Now, you do have, just like we mentioned whenever we start going boss by boss, the same thing we did when we looked at, not Manaforge Omega, but when we looked at Liberation of Undermine, right? As, first week we were missing, a whole bunch of bosses, we were getting like here, and we were making, the asterisk, be careful checking the overall damage meters early on, because there could be some bosses, for example, that have dot specs that can double or split their damage by hitting both bosses in Cauldron. You have, of course, AoE specs that can pad the damage by cleaving on the adds, or even sticks. You have things like Balanced Druids or Shadow Priests or Affliction Warlocks that can hit the targets spawning from everywhere, all of the adds on sticks. So obviously, as long as these are the only bosses available, that damage profile will have a much bigger impact, because if you're killing only 3 bosses, then the split damage of Cauldron accounts for 33% of all of the bosses available in the overall damage. But when you clear the entire raid, then the value of the damage you have done on Cauldron will be much smaller. And this is a good example for a boss like Araz, but even a boss like Soulbinder. You know, it's not that weird to see specs, Windwalker as well, but also Subtlety and Outlaw with the way this boss works, which is spawning adds. Spawning adds in melee, spawning adds grouped on the boss. So, you know, talking about spread damage like One-Armed Bandit or like sticks. This is a more, I guess, melee favored kind of damage when they are all grouped up, as opposed to a more, or rather, we should say, a completely, nearly pure single target one like Lumitar. You can see that, for example, in here, despite having some 30 or so logs, almost everyone is playing Assassination, with only 1 player going sub and 1 player going outlaw. And then you go back to the one with adds, and now outlaw and sub are here. That's because outlaw has great, sustained, and even bursty AoE damage on fewer targets because they are target capped. And guess what's good? This is not a Mythic plus key. You're not pulling 15 mobs, so Outlaw suffers a lot because they are target capped. You are fighting this boss, which does have a limited amount of adds spawning. Sub is also pretty good at this style of damage, being able to gain way more resources by fighting in AoE compared to fighting in single target. So of course the results will also wildly swing depending on the boss and I guess the damage type of the boss. So pure single target like Plexus Sentinel, a spec we just mentioned like Sub, is much lower. Meanwhile, Elemental, Destro, Demo are much higher. Then you go to Lumitar, which is also a single target boss. You do have the webs you have to break, but they are still, you know, basically single target. Again, you have specs that gain value there. You have the extra value of Destro, of course, because they can havoc the boss while hitting the web, so they can double up on their damage. And then you go to the Add boss, where this can change more wildly because you have some specs doing better at small bursts of damage every add spawns together. So you see specs like Outlaw, specs like Windwalker, specs like Devastation Evoker, which do have these bursts of AoE damage that fit very well the damage pattern of Soulbinder. So for now, these 3 bosses is what is making up the overall damage that we can see right now. And there will be time and there will be place for different damage profiles. For example, right after these 3 you have Araz, which will again have add spawns with burst damage on the adds spawning plus possible funnel for boss damage by hitting the adds. You have Soul Hunters, which is a pure 3 target cleave kind of fight, pure single target fight. For most of this fight it will be a pure single target fight as well. So it will change, of course, week by week as you kill more bosses and more parses are logged of the different damage profiles boss by boss. This will change a lot. If we could, I guess, find the most surprising results compared to Heroic, even actually since Heroic, has been the DKs. Because if we go back to the results, the DKs are supposed to be here. The DKs are supposed to be the 2 strongest DPS, the 2 melee DPS that are the strongest, and right below Elemental overall. Meanwhile, while Elemental is remaining where it's supposed to be, DK is not. DK is in the mid to bottom half of Heroic, and even when you jump into Mythic, DK is even lower down. And it's not that it's a fringe spec, right? Frost is supposed to be meta, Frost is being played. If you're watching the Race to World First, of course, DKs are being played there as well, but in terms of results right now, in terms of damage right now, it's doing much worse than expected. And they're not even one of the specs that gains the most from going from old 4-piece to new 4-piece. They are in the 15-ish% range, and you will see plenty more specs being much further up than the 15% of Frost DK. So it's not that they are the ones that are waiting for a massive power boost in their tier. In terms of other results compared to where you would expect the specs to be based on this damage, well, the next one doing reasonably poorly compared to their damage in their sims is Feral, who is supposed to be one of the highest simming melee specs. Fury is also technically the second, I guess, third highest simming below the DKs. You have Fury and then you have Feral. Those are not doing nearly as well as expected. Who is doing much better, even after being buffed, it wasn't really going up by that much, was Havoc. Havoc seemingly is having a much better time in these first 3 bosses in Mythic. It seems like the 2 ones who have, or rather the 3 ones who have kept their expectations so far are Demon, Destro and Elemental, who have done well since the Sim, and then they entered Heroic and they were still amongst the top, and then they entered Mythic and they were still amongst the top. So they were the ones that remained without surprises between even before the season to then the release of the season, and then getting into Mythic. They have continued doing very, very well. We will see, of course, next week will be majorly important because it's where also many of these players will commit even things like crafts. Next week you will get your second half of the Spark to get 2 full crafts available for you, which means for many of these players might mean, for example, a 720 item level with embellishment crafted stuff. So it will be a massive power boost. Specs, for example, like melees will have access to a 2-handed crafted 720 item level weapon, which will also be a major boost in DPS for those specs, as well as, of course, your first vault, and pretty much at this point in the next reset, the guarantee that basically everyone will have the 4-piece set bonus, at least of the guilds jumping into Mythic. But for now, this is the current performance when it comes to the DPS. Now, when it comes to healers, looking at Heroic was just about very similar to what we looked at the PTR results in the testing, which was these 3 specs being first and then these others being lower down, with the confirmation of Discipline being the lowest down. Technically, Discipline Priest used to be matched by Holy Paladin, but since then, since a month after the PTR testing, Holy Paladin has been buffed like 3 times back to back to back, and Discipline has not. So the growth of Holy Paladin was also expected because of the buffs they received. Meanwhile, it is expected for Discipline to just remain very average. However, once we go from the first results in Heroic to the first results of Mythic, you do have the slightest change of Holy Paladin going leapfrogging, I guess, Holy Priest and kicking them out of the top 3. I would like to draw an attention, not even to this thing right here, but rather just the popularity. 8 players played Discipline in the raid in Mythic. The other numbers are all pretty good. Look at these, you know, Mistweaver being basically 50% behind Holy, but then, you know, these numbers are pretty healthy. It means that there is a major variety in the healers being chosen. Even if we go right now to look at these race to world first results, right, and we pick some of these tough bosses, like let's say, for example, one of the third one that will be hard to progress through, and you check the compositions, right? It's like, oh well, race to world first, super nerds raiding 7 days a week, they will have min-maxed comp all similar, and then you check, and it's like Resto Shaman, Monk, Druid. And then it changes to Preservation Evoker in, Holy Paladin in, and still 1 Druid and 1 Shaman. And now we have a full swap for double Preservation Evoker, 1 Monk, 1 Holy Priest. Now we swap the Monk and the Holy Priest for a Holy Paladin and the Resto Shaman, and we keep the double Evoker. Then we cut out 1 Evoker to bring back a Priest. Then we cut out Evokers completely to go Druid, Monk, Paladin, Priest. So there is a lot of variety even in these compositions. So it is pretty cool to see that for now, at least, they are all very, very similar in terms of numbers. Right now, the healers. There is, however, at the moment, the outlier in terms of sheer numbers. The outlier of Preservation being quite far ahead. What's even more worrying actually at the moment is that Preservation also has the biggest gain out of any other healer in terms of HPS. Their HPS goes past 25% once they have their full tier. Holy Priest is at like 11%. Mistweaver is at like 17%. So Preservation is actually getting even stronger once they have their completed tier. So it does have shades of Season 1 Preservation, you know, when Flame Shaper came out and it had to be nerfed mid progress for most guilds because it was too strong. We are just about to be in that position at the moment, in even just seeing the first few bosses in Mythic and even getting influenced by seeing the multiple race to world first top 10 level guilds running double Preservation Evoker, for example, very similar to what we had in Season 1 of this expansion. But as a result, still, this is not surprising whatsoever. We have said this over and over again: 90-second cooldown burst spec, 90-second cooldown burst spec. If one is the strongest one in the tier, the other one dies out, because you have no reason to play it if this one is just stronger in what it does. Even worse when the companion in the same class, Holy, is doing just fine, with also a different healing profile than Evoker. So you have even fewer reasons to run this spec right now when Evoker is being this powerful at the moment compared to the other healers, right? So it is going according to plan to when we said if Evoker is being very strong, then Discipline dies. If Discipline is very strong, then Evoker dies. So in this case, it's the tier of Evoker over Discipline. However, with this being said, this is what we have for today, right before the release of this first week. Most guilds going through most of their raids for the week. This is what we have been seeing in Heroic early on. We checked again in Heroic for today, and then we went, of course, into Mythic, the more relevant one, the more relevant of the results so far, which is, of course, still a work in progress for the guilds. We will see, as we mentioned, next week, where the power level of the specs will jump up way more. We will get everyone with a 4-piece set bonus, and the balance tuning, specifically of this guy, of this guy, of this guy, of this guy, will all go live. So we will check also the changes in the performance based on that. But for today, though, on this Monday, this is what we have when we go and look over the current situation when it comes to the raid and the performance of the specs. So for today, at the beginning of this week, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, this was really the last one. This should really be the last day of terribly heaty, sticky, warm weather before the summer actually ends. I still trust.